Good afternoon, everyone. As today's event moderator, I would like to welcome you to the second online discussion within the Care for Care policy series. My name is Inga Sabanova. I am a policy officer at the FES Competence Center on the Future of Work. For the last 2 years, I have been involved in a number of projects related to platform work and introduction of new technologies at the workplace, overall highlighting the importance of workers' perspective in the debate on the future of work. So during the next hour today, we are going to look closely at the future of care in the light of platform work and digitalization. There is no doubt that digital platforms and technologies in general can play a vital role in the future of the European care strategy, enabling better access and support in education, healthcare, childcare, as well as long-term care. But to realize the full potential of digital technologies, it is important to consider multiple aspects of digitalization that can transform the care sector as the workplace. In doing so, our attention should be drawn mainly to improving working conditions of care workers. In recent years, we have witnessed the increasing presence of digital labor platforms practically in all sectors of the economy. For many, digital platforms are seen as an inclusive economic model, which has the capacity to transform the nature of work by providing better customized services as well as flexibility for workers. At the same time, we also observe that platform economy mirrors the traditional economic activities with sectoral and occupational segregation based on gender. Digital platforms in the care sector are dominated by women. What is more important to mention, in many cases, migrant women that remain completely invisible from the public debates. So today we have a panel of experts who are going to discuss challenges, opportunities, and solutions of platform work in relation to the European care strategy. First, we have a presentation from Claire Marceau. She's an associate professor of law at the Paris East University. The presentation will be followed by 2 interventions from Adam Rogolewski, policy officer at EPSU, the European Federation of Public Services Unions, and Aren Riabou-Leston, a policy officer at the European Institute for Gender Equality. Before giving the floor to Claire, I would like to remind you that it's an interactive event. Please use the chat for your questions. So without further delays, let's begin with the presentation from Claire Marceau. Claire, the floor is yours.
Hi, Inga. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very happy to be with you today. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to make a very brief presentation. Let me just do it like this. Very brief presentation in order to start the discussion about the future of care platform work and digitalization. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So then I think I just need to make it bigger and that's fine. Okay, so I guess the first thing I would like to say is that care platform work is not too visible yet, contrarily maybe to other types of platform work. And we directly think of Uber, of Deliveroo, big names of big platforms, but we don't really see yet that care platform work has developed. And it is important when considering the European care strategy to take these changes into account. And in fact, more specifically, I would like to focus on 2 aspects within care work. I would like to focus on digitalization on the one hand and platformization on the other hand. So first of all, I'll define care work because even if it was done extensively in the report that we wrote about the European care strategy, I think it's quite important for today that we get a sense of what we're talking about. And the only thing is that the little images are hiding the definitions. So care work are services that contribute directly to social reproduction or indirectly substitute for the absence of external provision of basic infrastructure that is essential for human survival. So it might seem like a difficult and long definition, but the point is to see that care work is extensive. It concerns a lot of activities, and the point is social reproduction. So it is fundamental to our development. Having said that, we can insist on the fact that care is very diverse in itself and will consist either in education services, in healthcare, or long-term care, short-term care. There is a big diversity. And that's why putting this subject together with the question of digitalization and or platformization is going to be very rich, very interesting. And that's why I felt that we should also define these terms. And I want to spend a minute talking about digitalization. So digitalization is something that we all witness nowadays. It's the adaptation of a system process to be operated with the use of computers and the internet. And platformization is a little bit more specific. It is a form of employment, and I insist on this term, employment in which organizations or individuals use an online platform to access other organizations or individuals to solve specific problems. So we will focus today specifically on the European Care Strategy and see the extent to which it focuses on these questions of digitalization and platformization. So the first thing, which I have already said, but I want to insist for a minute, is that domestic work and platforms have increased a lot. And so we have numbers now, even if it still is a rather small part of the economy, it is growing up incredibly quickly, and it involves taking into account these changes. So in order to assess the European Care Strategy, I think it is important to focus on both these aspects. And I'll start with digitalization to then turn to platformization. When it comes to the European Care Strategy and digital care services, we need to see that it is both an opportunity and a risk and challenges. So it's very important to keep in mind that digital care services are now a new spirit. Like, in fact, we've seen changes. We've seen important changes with the pandemic, with the digitalization, with the neo-capitalism in the whole world. And society is changing quickly. And the European Union, and that's fantastic, is trying to tackle these changes. And the European Care Strategy is very much in this, following this phenomenon. So how is digitalization an opportunity? It is an opportunity because it's the possibility to transform and maybe facilitate administrative procedures. It is definitely a way to improve communication and to match offer and needs. Possibly, with keeping in mind the access to services, it is the attempt to go towards a better quality care. And it might transform the feasibility of home care. In fact, we're talking about telemedicine, we're talking about telehealth, about telecare, and all these possibilities are very rich and making us hope that there is really something which can be done here. Even in the field of education, which is not so much tackled by the European Care Strategy. I mean, education is tackled by the strategy, but online education or digitalization of education is not so tackled. And I think it's very important to say that it could be really helpful. And even nowadays, we see the impact, for instance, of ChatGPT in order to transform this teaching. And we see that there is a lot of opportunities. What matters, though, is that we need to be very aware of the risks and challenges. And I really liked this sentence that I picked in the strategy, and I think it must be underlined. Actually, it wasn't in the strategy, but it was in the other communication, which was proposed at the same time as the strategy. The condition is that it should be designed purposefully and implemented in a cost-effective way. The point is to protect people. We must keep in mind that technology should not replace human interaction. And we should keep in mind, we should identify effective safeguards. For instance, I'm thinking of the GDPR, but there are many other aspects that we need to take into account. More broadly speaking, maybe in more longer term policy, we need to rethink the whole idea of public service. And this is something which is touched upon in the strategy, and I think it is extremely interesting. But in fact, we're opening the Pandora box here. The Pandora box, because here we're trying to see how the public services must be transformed in order to adapt to digitalization. And so that's the questions of accessibility of digital public services, or maybe creation of a European health data space, which has been mentioned elsewhere. The second point I want to look at with you, if I manage here, is the question of work. So after having seen public services and digitalization, I want to focus more specifically on work and more specifically on care platform work. And here again, the European Care Strategy focuses on this question, even if it actually tackles it from a specific angle, which has more to do with gender, which is extremely interesting, but which, in my opinion, forgets some elements that we should be aware of. So here again, I want to say that platform work, as Inga said in introduction, platform work is an opportunity, but it is also a challenge. And we need to keep in mind that we should ensure that there is dignity for the workers. It is particularly difficult in the context that Inga mentioned and that I have very briefly mentioned, context of feminization of the sector and a big number of migrants. We have invisible workers here who must be protected even more than those who can protect themselves. There is the question of legal statuses, and I hope to be able to come back to this afterwards. The point is that workers, whatever the legal status is, should get a protection. And this has an impact in terms of the recognition of their rights. And here I'm talking about fundamental social rights. But when I say fundamental, you should not think that this is high and irrelevant. I'm talking about practical social rights that workers should have in their daily basis. And here again, I think there is a whole reflection we can make in order to reassess the different labor rights, equality rights, social dialogue rights, and training rights in light of digitalization. I'll just conclude because I've already exhausted my time, and I'll conclude by saying that the European Care Strategy is not about the digital transition, but it acknowledges it. And that's very important because it proposes a vision for the future of Europe, which I think must be helped, must be decided, must be refined, and which hopefully will take into account these different questions of digitalization and platformization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire, for highlighting very important points, how European care strategy can address digitalization in the care work. Now we have the first input from Adam.
Yes, thank you very much, colleagues, and I welcome you very much on our webinar today, which again is organized together with EPSO And I think it's very important that we're meeting actually today and we'll discuss this subject in June, because as you know, there were very important developments in relations to the directive on platform workers, whereas the Council made its opinion on the 7th of June. And last week we have a vote in the European Parliament on the artificial intelligence. So I think this webinar is very much relevant to what we are discussing. It's not as such the questions of platform work in the care sector. It's not a very new phenomenon, I think. I was previously working in the trade union in Switzerland, and I already remember back in 2015 we observed that the growing number of the platform work which employed care workers, and there was one particular case which actually shows very important way in these discussions that we remember there was one of the company that was treating the workers very badly. Then the workers went on strike, then the company paid the compensation, and then the owner of this company decided to close down the company and open the work platform. Why? Because he's not taking any responsibility for the employment conditions of the workers. And I think this is extremely dangerous, because as we see that the platform workers are growing in terms of the care sector, there's about 20% of them, I think, now. Globally, and we really need to ensure that those workers who are working there are being protected, and we don't use the platform work to make this sector of our economy even more precarious, because we know from the perspective that and from the experience that our working conditions are extremely precarious, where the workers don't know who is their employers, or the workers have no rights to employment contract. It's also very important to underline that this is the role, of course, of the public sector. So as a care is not a commodity, it should be dealt with the public sector. And we have any examples of the public money which are being subsidized, the care used by the private company. With some of them are not addressing the issue of taxation, so they're not paying taxes. So again, I think it's important to have the human-centered approach to that, and it's really important to carry on more sort of research in relations to the platform work, in particular after the pandemic. And as the professor was rightly saying before, it's growing, and we need to really ensure that we provide good working conditions for the care workers. I don't know whether, Inga, you want me to answer another question, or it should be only the introduction from our side about that.
Thank you so much, Adam. I think we will continue in our discussion, and thank you for raising two important points about the developments in relation to the AI directive and AI Act and the Platform Directive. We will come back to these points in our discussion, and we can continue with Iran's contribution straight away.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having invited Ege to participate in this workshop. And of course, congratulations for this great study that you have carried out. It's really a relevant piece of research that sheds more light on this complex topic. So we know that artificial intelligence, digitalization, and platformization are extremely important in our today's societies, because they are changing our world of work and they are introducing new forms of employment. And as was already mentioned, this can create new opportunities for gender equality, but also new challenges at the same time, because it can reinforce gender inequalities that already existed in the labor market, such as gender stereotypes or discrimination or sexism and so on. So at the European Institute for Gender Equality here at EIGE, we have worked extensively on this topic, and and we have touched it from different angles. One of our latest studies on the topic is based on an online panel survey that we run in 10 EU member states, and we interviewed almost 5,000 platform workers to understand exactly who they are, who they, which are their main characteristics, what are the challenges they are facing, why they do platform work, and so on. So to our knowledge, this is one of the biggest surveys of platform workers in Europe so far, and probably the only one that specifically focused on gender issues in platform work. Our data from this survey show that out of all platform workers, 58% are men and 42% women. And most of them are young workers, well-educated, and workers with care responsibilities. Their average age is 31 years, and this may raise certain concerns because although platform work can be a way for some young workers to enter in the labor market and so to gain experience, others may be at risk of getting entrapped in precarious jobs. Also, from these socio-demographic characteristics, we know that platform workers are well-educated. 47% of male platform workers and 41% of so 47 female platform workers and 41% male platform workers have completed tertiary education. As platform work frequently entails low-skill activities, this data imply that women are more likely to do jobs that do not match their education level and their skills. And this puts women at a higher risk of losing their skills. And regarding the care responsibilities, well, we know from this data that care responsibilities of platform workers and their work-life balance also entails some difficulties. We know that some forms of platform work are highly flexible, so they provide important opportunities to combine paid and unpaid work. And this is likely to support women's work participation, since women usually undertake most of the care work. However, in some cases, these opportunities, what in fact may do is reinforce the unequal distribution of unpaid work and reinforce stereotypes. Our data shows that a higher share of women do platform work because they can combine it with household chores and family responsibilities. This is a higher share for women than for men. Precisely, we have 30% of women that do platform work because of this work-life balance, against to 28% of men. But aside from this easy entry to the labor market, actually there is limited evidence of flexibility in platform work. The platform workers often work during the night or weekends, and many are unable to choose when to work and their working hours. No, so in addition, there are important penalties imposed by platforms for interrupted work. And in this context, the policy recommendation is to extend working hours regulation and work-life balance measures to women and men working in platforms, and to promote equal sharing of care responsibilities between women and men as in any other sector. In this context, the directive of transparent and predictable working condition is a great and a first step to ensure a balance between flexibility and security for workers in digital economy. And its transposition at member state level should include for sure platform work. And similarly, the national transposition of the Work-Life Balance Directive should ensure that platform workers, both women and men, can benefit from its provisions in relation to flexible working arrangements and access to parental leave. So we already have the tools, and what we have to do is to implement them in order to work through these important changes in platform work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, everyone, for your inputs. We can now start with our discussion and taking up also questions from the audience. I would like to remind the audience, if you would like to ask a question, please use the chat option below. So to start the discussion, I have the first question to Claire and Irene to reflect on your research. Considering multiple aspects of digitalization and platformization, how do you see short-term and long-term political strategies for the future of the digital public services and digital rights for caregivers? Claire, can we start with you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for your question. And I must say that's also an opportunity to answer what Irene was saying, because in fact, there are a few things, in fact, there are a lot of things where I completely agree. But when it comes to the tools that you said, we already have the tools. I must say that I think there is much more we can do. And in fact, the tools we have, and indeed, as Adam was saying at the beginning, the very new tools we have must be improved, in my opinion. And so that will be a good opportunity to discuss that. So in order to answer, I'll say that when it comes to short-term policy, I think the priority is to rediscuss, improve the tools which already exist and the tools which are being discussed right now. And so I'm talking obviously about this directive that you both mentioned on platform work, platform workers' working condition. And I think it's worth spending a minute on that, but I will in a second if you allow me. When it comes to short-term policy as well, I think it's important to realize that the situation of these workers, and particularly care platform workers, has to be improved now. And that means going back to these tools, but also understanding and making people aware that these invisible workers are here and that they need protection. And maybe I'll turn to long-term before I go back to these texts. When it comes to long-term policies, I would say that here we need to try and understand what digitalization is going to mean in terms of transformation of public services. And this is a huge question, but this is an implicit question in the European care strategy, which has to be put in light, which has to be addressed in order for all of us, and I mean all European states, to try and assess what this is going to mean. And I think Europe is very proud about its social model and should be, but now it has to be improved and transformed by digitalization. So, and that's actually one way to come back to another thing that Irene said, when you were specifically talking about this beautiful study that you made, and which is indeed, I think, the biggest that we've had up to now. Like, it's very interesting to see how platforms appear are like a platform, but this time without the digital aspect. So like an element which leads to work, and at the same time, platforms are platforms in order not to work, in order to have more time, more flexibility, in order to take care of people. And that's very interesting in light of the European care strategy, because we see that the worker is also not a worker. The worker is also a carer, and we need to work with this transformation. I mean, this versatility of the human being as a carer. So now maybe back to the platform work directive. That is obviously the short-term policy aspect that we need to focus on, because it is an agreement was formed on the 7th of June, and I think that it should be great, because the point of this text is to create a presumption of employment for platform workers. So ideally, the first idea you get when you haven't read the text is that you're a platform worker, you're an employee, and hence you get employees' rights, employees' social protection, etc. The problem is, how is this presumption going to be applied? And unfortunately here, I must say that the agreement that we got, and which in fact is different from what the Parliament, the European Parliament had proposed, and in fact different again from what the Commission had proposed before, we see that it might be much more difficult than what we might imagine at first sight. And this is a very big question for platform workers in general, but also for care platform workers, and in fact, more importantly, for care platform workers, because it is quite likely that often these workers are not going to be employees, which means that they're going to be independent workers and will not get the protections, not get as many protections as employees. And I think this takes us to a long-term policy goal. I'm sorry, I might be speaking too much. I just finished there and I open the floor. We need to think about this distinction between employees and independent workers. And we need to make sure that all workers, like the Commission had announced in a recommendation in 2019, all workers get access to proper social protection, and I would add labor rights. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing again the issue of the directive, and we will come back to it in a minute. I'm coming back with my initial question about the long-term and short-term strategies being mentioned, and how is it possible to address it by European policymakers? Ivan?
Yeah. Well, for this future of the digital services, well, we could speak about many angles, no? But I want to take this opportunity to stress the need of consider always the impact that digitalization can have on gender equality, because this precise aspect is rarely explicitly recognized in the EU policies. So the integration of the gender dimension in this digital transition is a way itself increase the responsibility and the trustworthiness of the new technologies, the digital innovation, and so on. So in this context, it's really crucial to highlight one aspect, that is the digital gender divide. So there are important gender differences in digital skills and the use of digital devices. So and these differences increased with the age. Women generally experience bigger obstacles than men in developing or updating their digital skills. And this is extremely relevant when we talk about the use of digital services. Another aspect is the connectivity. No? So connectivity and digital gender gap are key. And we cannot forget when we talk about digital services. And in this context, the Digital Education Action Plan and the updated European Skill Agenda provides some basis for addressing gender stereotypes in relation to the use of digital technologies, and also for taking concrete measures to address the gender gaps in skills and competencies. So to have access to affordable and high quality digital services, we need to take steps that prevent and combat gender stereotypes and gender segregation, both in the education and in the labor market.
Thank you so much. Okay, we see that the priority should be laid in with a focus on migration, as well as highlighting the digital gender gap. So now, talking from the trade union perspective and reflecting on the inputs from Claire and Elaine, Adam, to what extent care workers are aware of challenges and opportunities in the future of work?
I mean, care workers are aware of any other workers, but I think we need to really differentiate here between the digitalization which is taking place and the platform workers, which is part of the digitalization. So when it comes to the digitalization, of course, there are positive aspects of that. We know that will make work of the workers in the care sector easier because they need to do like a paper work, paper form. There will be probably less bureaucracy. We also know in general that digitalization could help us to address the occupational health and safety risks, because we know we'll be doing better and quicker risk assessments where we actually see if there are any potential problems at the workplaces. Already with EU OSHA, there are a lot of the interactive old risk assessments tools that they're being prepared. One of this will be probably prepared with social partners in the social services and in the healthcare sector. So we know that it's a challenge for everyone, but also it's a positive development, but it's also a very negative development when we talk about care here, because I think Claire was mentioning about the telemedicine. It's not positive as such, because what it will actually means that you will be, I don't know, talking to someone else being quite far away, rather to having a person-to-person approach. And I mean, who is listening here, we need to understand that care is the work that you need to be with the person, to understand the person, to talk to persons. And by digitalization, we're quite afraid that it actually could lead to more so-called care deserts, whereby there will be no any care homes, there will be no any community care, because all of this will be doing via digitalizations there. So I think we already observe this in the health sector, when you could call your doctor, but you cannot see your doctor because it's quite far away. So I think that's the issues there, the biggest issues, and we observe it coming back to this discussion on the directive on platform workers. I think is just we really need to stop doing this development in a way in which that it adds more precarious working conditions to the care workers, who already suffer a lot because of the stress, because of moving from place to place, and then not knowing who is their employers. De facto, it's the biggest issues, and therefore they need to know that they are employee. We already see, because there are some developments on the trade union side. I post in the chat channel some of our advices. You could actually see that with artificial intelligence, you could notice that if you follow yourself, you could actually see how many overtime you are doing, because you need to go from place to place. But there was a research conducted by the German, I think, think tank on that, saying that the platform they don't really deal with this amount of hours, and they have difficulties in paying for that. So I think that's the issues for that. And maybe coming back to Claire and this assessment of the directive and the first agreement from the council, it's really disappointing, because what they actually did, of course, they recognized the issues, but they said you need to meet a lot of criteria to be employee, employee, not a worker, so employee. And if you meet 3 out of 7 criteria, you'll be employee, and then you have this presumption of being employee. But again, I think we need to really address the platform work cross-sectoral, so for everyone to be allowed to have good working conditions, and therefore looking specifically to the care sector, which again is highly dominated by women, as we know about that 90%, and also by the migrant women. And I think here is also adding up another layer of precariousness for the migrant women, who sometimes really don't know the language, don't know the legal situation. So it's actually make the exploitation much easier in terms of their rights. And I think that's what we need to do. So apart from the directive, it's good that we are having this discussion for 2 years, but we really need to here also address occupational health and safety, because that's crucial. So we know that the work platforms cannot check any potential risks at there. So we need to really ensure that those workers are protected for the occupational health and safety. That's the issues. And also for the social protections, now for their pensions or being off sick. Could you imagine like being a care worker when you go from place to place and pick up some sickness and then finally say, no, you have no right to sick, like that. So that's all I think from my comments in terms of that. So I think we really need to, and this is for the policymakers on the European level to finally finalize the directive and to improve the working conditions for the workers in the platform, which will be growing.
Claire, you raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to respond to both Irene and Adam, because it's true that I haven't mentioned yet this gender equality issue. And indeed, it's, I think there might be a question afterwards. So yeah, indeed, we came to the same conclusion within the CEPASOC project, which I've been directing in the last 2 years. And we also interviewed platform workers, in fact, more specifically, domestic and care platform workers. And we had the same statistics as what you mentioned, which is that, so in fact, we mostly interviewed women. There was one man, but like, so in this sector, it was quite remarkable. And we had the same impression that we had high education, highly educated women with lower skilled activities, who were actually also 31-year-olds in general. So like you see this same trend, and who were looking for flexibility. And the sociologists of the project, which were both from the UK and France, concluded that they were, in French, they said déclassés, which I find a very interesting term, and I find it very difficult to translate, so I apologize for imposing this to you. But I would say like out of their social class, which is quite interesting, because these are people who are, as we said, who are very adaptable, who are usually very clever, who have a high education, and who haven't found their place in the standard jobs. And as a result, maybe because of migration, maybe because of something else, they have had to find another entry gate into professionalization. And platforms have seemed to be a good solution. And so it's obviously a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it gives access to some people who might not have had access otherwise to a job. But obviously, this job shouldn't be precarious and shouldn't lead to, to being less well treated than employees. And so that's we find this same unbalance and this same difficulty. Which is very interesting then in terms of collective bargaining, and to go back to what Adam was saying, because indeed it is going to be much more difficult for these people because they feel invisible to get access to any sort of collective bargaining. And there I might add just one point. There is a need, and many people have said that before, to rethink and to adapt collective bargaining and social dialogue in order to include more workers. And here in the same study, this CEPASOC study, we found that in fact, social media, and so in a way digitalization, had been a way forward. And I find that very interesting. In fact, we saw that our workers were using Facebook in order to get a pay raise, and it actually worked. So we see that obviously this is not the way forward. There are many other ways, and there should be much more thinking and implementation on the improvement of collective bargaining. But it's very interesting to see that digitalization is changing the rules of the game here as well. So that's it for now.
Thank you so much. And it leads to the questions we have in the chat. And how do you ensure that platform care workers have their workers' rights reinforced? And I think you already touched a little bit on aspects of collective bargaining. And probably you have some examples of strategies workers have to organize.
So actually, yes, collective bargaining is one good answer. And so my previous answer kind of adapts here or works. But I think it's interesting here to mention also the very old strategies, and I think work inspectors are a very good idea. And I must say that this is something we tend to forget. But, when there are laws, applicable laws, they should be applied. It's incredibly basic and to say that, but this has sometimes been forgotten, and especially with the legal uncertainty which rules in many countries at the moment. Like I'm thinking of France, but it's true in actually in Spain, in Bulgaria, in the UK. Anyway, in many countries, we see that. So particularly in France, we see this discrepancy between, on the one hand, some judges, even at the highest level, who are going to say that these workers are employees, and other judges, or even the legislator, who's saying that these workers are not employees. And so they end up in a very difficult situation. And I think the first way forward in order to go towards enforcement is clarity. And so at the highest level, we must decide what is their situation. And in fact, I'm going to say it, I think the decision should be towards the protection of workers.
Thank you so much. We already touched a little bit on migrant workers, and I would like to come back to this topic to reflect what has been mentioned earlier. In our project at the FES Competence Center, we see particularly importance of integrating the perspective of migrant workers in the debate of digitalization. And in recent study conducted by the EPC, we found that the positive impact of the proposed already actual platform directive will likely be limited by differences in bargaining powers between migrant workers and platforms. And of course, in this context, I refer migrants as third country nationals. So my question now is addressed to Adam. When it comes to the care sector, in your work, is it important to address the challenges of vulnerable groups of workers, such as migrant care workers?
Yes, of course, and this is what we are doing in our European Federation. Because maybe for information, colleagues, we represent 8 million workers from Iceland to Kazakhstan. So we don't only have, the European Union perspective, we have perspective in the UK, but also in post-Soviet countries, where is a lot of migrations from countries to countries. In particular, for instance, Armenia and Georgia. I just would like to maybe finish these discussions about what Claire was saying about the level of clarity. But I think, colleagues, here is that the phenomenon of development of platform workers is basically because it's easier to make money and no responsibility. This is my experience as a trade unionist back in Switzerland. So just you create a platform work, you match people to people, and they saying, I'm not taking any responsibility, I'm only paying for your time, occupational health and safety. I have no really idea about that. But it's also adding to that. We also have the care recipients, which are completely here vulnerable because, they are probably older people when it comes to long-term care, but also maybe their families, who doesn't live with their families and so on and so forth. But what is even much more worrying is they are not even, some of the care workers are not even employed. They don't get the task from the platform itself. There is a companies, I think that was the case in Poland, who actually doing the work for the platform work. So, you have, let's say, a really Byzantium structures whereby there's a platform work, there is like a private company who is doing for the platform work and then paying money for the carriers, etc. In terms of the migrant workers, but also the minorities, we see the growing case of that. One of the cases actually in Germany, there is like a platform work called Marta. Why Marta? Because it's a name for the Polish woman, presumably, or maybe Eastern European woman. And you could actually see that they're actually matching already the people who are doing the living care, because that's a really growing trend in the care sector, so domestic care. And I think here is extremely important to collective bargaining to really monitor this and to ensure that the migrant workers are not being treated very badly, because as we know from our research, the only way to get into the care sector for migrant women is via doing, domestic work or doing a living care work. Then they could actually improve their language skills. Then they could go for trainings, and then they could actually be employed for community care or for the long-term care. And here, what is actually missing in this discussion, I think, and what is crucial for the workers in the care sectors are skills. I mean, the skills. So it's the right to improve your skills, the right to to being to train in terms of the work you do in the care work, and also the language skills. So I don't see any. I honestly didn't come across to any platform work which will be paying for the workers to attend the skills trainings as opposed to a normal employer. So I think here is the issues, and we're trying to support migrant workers in that, and we have a lot of experience on that area. In terms of, as I say, in terms of the artificial intelligence, I already share a link with you. You could actually access to these links. That's a project we are doing with Global Federation with Friedrich Eberst.
Adam, thank you so much for mentioning the skills. And I think the next question is very links well to Iran's expertise. How can we tackle skills, especially new skills required with the automation and the labor shortages with education and training at the European level? And what is more important, how can we design public policies to make sure that they are not only gender-proofed, but also address the rights of migrant workers?
Well, here in relation to the skills, I just to complement what Adam said, we need to deal with lower skills and to put in place mechanisms to improve those skills, but also we have to deal with the recognition of the high skills, because some migrant workers come to the EU with very high skills and very high qualification in relation to care, but they are facing problems when it comes to the recognition, the official recognition of those skills. And then in relation of, in general, the vulnerable groups and how to guarantee a safe working space, that is also a question from Gerard, that you mentioned before. I would say that in general, we have two, again, key tools in our hands. One is the ratification of the ILO Convention on Domestic Workers, because only 8 EU member states have thus far ratified that convention that recognize the significant contribution to domestic workers to the global economy, and also covers the equal paid jobs for women and men, rights related to family responsibilities, covers also the needs of care, the aging population. So it touches key aspects in this debate. And another tool that we have in our hands in order to guarantee a safe space for platform workers in general and specifically for vulnerable population is the ratification of the ILO Convention on Violence and Harassment at Work, because only 5 member states ratified this convention in the European Union, despite that the European Union is promoting it. So all of this will allow us addressing the main challenges of vulnerable groups and will improve their living and working conditions without any doubt.
Thank you so much. I think we are really running out of time and we have only 5 minutes left. So I would like to have a very quick round, and if you can provide me one key message, one takeaway message in one sentence based on our discussion today. In discussing platform work and care, how can we make sure that digitalization will positively contribute to gender equality and social fairness? One sentence, Claire.
In one sentence, how to make sure that digitalization will improve care and care services. We have, I mean, it's a bad sentence, I'm sorry, but we have to make it happen. And I think it's we need to think of policies which will ensure that this happens. So going back to the legislative sides, probably because I'm a lawyer, you know, I'm tempted to say that indeed, going back to the ILO is a very good idea, ensuring that the directives are not empty shells and that they go towards the real protection of workers, the improvement of skills of carers, a real public service, a real are policies we need to think of and we need to develop together. But I'm quite happy to see that many people are fighting for that improvement, and I hope that it will take us to a more beautiful world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. One sentence.
I could be longer as well. No, but what I think here is we need to have a human-centered approach, because when we talk about artificial intelligence, then people need to be in charge and then people need to know what's going on. And to that, I'm also backing bringing the social dialogue, which is important, the trade union rights. So, I mean, the workers need to be in charge of any form of employment, and they need to have equal rights. So we know there is a digitalization, but we need to ensure that the workers are represented there as well as care recipients. It's not about customer service, it's about the proper employment contract. So I think the positive way will be if we have surely this presupposition of that the platform for the work platform is employment condition. I mean, that's important. That's we need to really empower workers to say that's my employer, and then we end up this situation, because as you remember, colleagues, it's the same about discrimination in terms of employment relations. So if the workers claim that they discriminate on any grounds, then it's for the employer to prove otherwise. So I think that's really important to have these presumptions of employment conditions, and I think that will make life easier for everyone. So human-centered approach, social dialogue, and to have all of the workers being treated as employees, not to be discriminated, because that's what I want to say. We need to end discrimination of platform workers in Europe.
Thank you. And Ren?
Well, to summarize such a complex topic in only one sentence is a difficult exercise, but I would say that we must include the gender perspective in our policies in order to avoid the reinforcement and the perpetuation of the already existing gender inequalities and the gender stereotypes, and to make a better world for women and men, both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to wrap up this very interesting session. I would like to thank you, all the speakers, for their contribution today. We have raised very important issues related to challenges and opportunities that platforms and digitalization in general can bring to the domains of care. We see that there are still many open questions regarding vulnerability of many care workers. However, to overcome the challenges, there is a clear need for stronger workers' rights perspective and joint efforts to seek solutions to challenge digitalization brings to the care sector. Once again, I thank you very much for being with us. I would like to remind you that the next seminar will be held on the 6th of September. The webinar will closely look at care as a driver for well-being. And I wish you a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much.